We're going to go ahead and get started today. This session will be recorded. Hello and welcome to Sterling and VMware's Power Block session. I am Megan Moore, Sterling's VMware Partner Business Manager. We know your time is valuable, so we want to say thank you for choosing to spend a portion of your day with Sterling and VMware. Before we dive into the demo, I wanted to give you a brief overview of Sterling's capabilities. Sterling is a principal VMware partner and a preferred services partner authorized to sell and service VMware solutions to customers across the nation. With 50 plus technical staff and 75 plus sales staff, all trained on VMware offerings, we are sure to provide you with an industry best value on all of your client to cloud IT needs. As you can see from this slide, Sterling holds many VMware competencies, including 2 master services competencies and more coming soon. Next slide, please. Sterling offers complete customized solutions from client to cloud. We serve on multiple federal, state, local government contracts and support all industry verticals. Security is of the utmost importance here at Sterling. We have a robust, secure supply chain, including OTIPs and CMMC certifications. For any questions about Sterling, please use the email aliases that you will find at the end of the demo. For questions during the demo, please put them in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we will address them at the end. Now, I will turn it over to Cloud Architect Nathan Bennett to demonstrate Ansible and vRealize automation.
All right, thank you so much for that introduction, Megan. And thanks everyone for joining us today. Very happy to discuss some of my favorites. Everybody that knows me knows I'm an automation fanboy, I guess you would say. And Ansible is just one of my first loves, as well as vRealize automation. So it's always fun to talk about these products that really work together to create a really powerful solution. So again, as introduction, my name is Nathan Bennett. I'm a cloud architect. I've been in the automation space for a number of years now. I've done a lot of different things with vRealize automation. I've seen how it can transform companies from an ITIL, ITSM driven business to an automated DevOps style that allows them to, define specific code bases using, whether it's policy as code, software as a service, infrastructure as code, all of those different tool sets, you can bring those into this self-service platform and be able to utilize that for a lot of different things. From a very high end, the infrastructure that we're going to be using is, of course, Ansible open source. We're running that in a Ubuntu 18 box. We're going to use vRealize automation 8.3. So it comes with all of the different bells and whistles that 8.3 are utilizing, such as secret management and some of the new things that 8.3 brings. We're going to be deploying our machines into a VCF environment, into the workload domain. So we have a specific vCenter for the workload that's going to be deployed into, and then we're going to be using vRealize automation, of course, to do the infrastructure deployment. And then vRealize automation is going to call to our Ansible control box for the operating system configuration management piece. So in terms of the agenda for today, we're going to go over, I like to define it as a story time of what vRealize automation does for a business. And this story is very near and dear to my heart, as it's something that I've seen. We're going to go over some of the reasons for using Ansible and using this solution. Ansible is just very easy to use. It's very friendly in terms of utilizing the components and the modules. But it has its own different hiccups and different features that you have to be aware of when you're looking at all the different solutions that are out there. And there are many. So, and then we're going to jump into the live demo. We're going to show 2 different deployments here, one utilizing Windows and one utilizing Linux. And then we'll kind of just do a basic web deployment using Ansible so you can see a little bit about how it works. We're going to do some log tailing and some configuration walkthrough of the different files that Ansible is using. So when we talk about this story time that I've personally experienced multiple times with vRealize automation, it really is the transforming power of DevOps through a platform as a service tooling. And the story that I always go back to is always starts with the developer, and I call him Jack. So Jack is a developer at a business, and his management team has tasked him with upgrading and running bug fixes for an application. So he needs to spin up some infrastructure to run the application and then be able to do additional bug fixes and upgrades to the software code that he has and push that to that infrastructure. So what does he do? He writes a ticket and sends it off to his infrastructure team. Now, his infrastructure team, or excuse me, his operations team is going to look into that solution and, excuse me, that ticket, and is going to try to figure out, okay, how long is this going to work? And depending on your operations team, they'll, send a response back, and they're quick to respond to the workload that they have and give you kind of a, okay, this is going to be a day, an hour, a couple of this or that, right? So sometimes the operations team is very quick with that. However, there are those times when a ticket gets lost in the ether, or one thing leads to another, and there's an emergency, and the operations team is tasked to go do that. And so what happens is this ticket is just kind of sitting out there. And so for Jack, the developer, he's put out this request, and he's wanted to get this infrastructure built. But there's this disconnect that he's starting to see. And in Jack's mind, this wait period that's happening isn't really a wait period as much as it's this brick wall of this just isn't going to happen. And so what is Jack going to do? He still has management coming to him daily asking any updates on this code sprint that he's on. But what happens is Jack creates a development account in the public cloud, and he comes down here and he says, well, I can just spin up a couple of resources, connect to them, deploy my application, and start working in there. And just that easily, he logs and creates an account, logs into it, and then spins up his resources from that platform as a service. This is a really powerful tool for Jack to, do his sprint, run all of the different commits necessary, commit that to his repository, and then go back to management and say, okay, this is what I've done. These are the upgrades that we need to focus on for the sprint. And this is what my code looks like. What actually just happened, is a good example of shadow IT for those that understand, that terminology, or this idea that there's infrastructure out there that is not under the operational guardrails. But what happened in terms of Jack is he just became a public cloud evangelist. And regardless of what that top workflow is that he's supposed to be doing for the business, and business has, resources to make sure that it's done the right way, and, change advisory boards and things of that nature, to Jack, none of that matters anymore, because he just realized that there's an easier, better way of doing this. He can just go request what he needs. He waits like a couple minutes maybe, and then he can immediately start utilizing those resources. And so what does vRealize automation actually do? And for this particular solution, is it changes that private cloud into a public cloud solution in terms of that platform as a service, right? So Jack can just log into vRealize automation and state, okay, this is what I need to build, and it goes out and performs all the automation tasks necessary, including, creating tickets, closing tickets for ITSM and policies that need to be followed. It can do infrastructure as code deployments to deploy whatever infrastructure is necessary. It can do network component configuration. It can do anything as a service through vRealize Orchestrator that can connect via different connection protocols and run those things. For any automation tool, it's not a magic bullet, right? So if you bring in Ansible and get it set up, it's still not going to do anything. If you bring in vRealize automation and get it set up, it's not necessarily doing anything. You have to actually put a little bit of sweat equity into the automations that you write and that you configure. And so with that in mind, I like to go through a little bit of my experience utilizing these things. And I've noticed a number of times that many people have this backwards, because they tend to think of these things in terms of what they have to get done. And my idea of best practice is to really start with those repetitive actions. Like these are the ones that are fun to discuss because every operations team knows them. They're the ones that they're like, oh yeah, we got 20 of them, but it doesn't matter. I can do it in like a minute. Well, you just found your time management scheme for that automation, right? So you've got a 20-minute factor that you can save by writing an automation for something that doesn't go to the operations team anymore. Logistically, Jack, our developer, clicks a button in vRealize automation and it does everything that's necessary. And the operations team doesn't even know that Jack did it outside of the policies that are being followed through ITSM or ITIL practices to verify that those requests were done, right? And so it maintains governance, excuse me, without the time from the operations team. The next one is just to find the high ticket load. This is normally your backlog of tickets. These are the, oh, well, we need to deploy these solutions, or we need to deploy, additional subsets that we need to focus on, right? And so these are the ones that you would want to focus second, right? A lot of people tend to think of this as like number one thing. The third thing, if you've got both of those down, your ticket load is in the repetitive actions, kind of takes away the easy things to look into when you want to automate. You've got to start looking somewhere else. And this is the hardest one, at least that in my experience, is talking to the customer. And this is where you actually have to kind of check your ego at the door and say, what isn't working? And I am 100% sure they will absolutely tell you, because they have, seen these things, they've felt these things, and they want to obviously tell you so that you can try to help them work better. And if I can boil this down, really, it's about automating the quick and easy first, and automating the large and heavy last. And these are the two bullet points that are flip-flopped a lot. Because a lot of people will want to bring in a tool, see it as a magic bullet, and then try to automate, the whole shebang right out of the gate. And what will happen with that type of mentality is you get a lot of technical burnout, where they're not able to actually succeed. By automating the quick and easy first, it develops a catalog of automation that can be built on. And that's really what we're going for here. It's that it allows you to say, okay, well, I've automated this solution. This solution is not that much different, so let me try to do that. And then you continually grow that catalog of services and automations for your customers. So Ansible, Ansible is one of my first loves. And when we talk about Ansible, why would you use it? And in this particular instance, the versatility that it brings. The first one is really easy with all open source, meaning it's technically free. You just run a couple of commands to install it, and then you're able to, run it on, CentOS, RHEL, Ubuntu, all these different solutions. Next, we've got just how simple and powerful that Ansible is. Ansible is human readable, and if you've worked with a lot of scripting codes, or just code in general, it's not really readable. You have to kind of understand what the syntax is in order to translate it into what's it actually doing. With Ansible, it's very easy to figure that out. And so it is extremely simple for you to read what's happening, but it's extremely powerful in that you can push it to multiple different operating systems, multiple different components, and push configuration directly to those components. Ansible is also agentless. For those that have run into issues specifically with agents running on different configuration management, you can understand the dangers here, especially with template management and agents. Patching your template may break an agent. I know that pain. So when you look into an agentless solution, it takes a lot of that ease. It gives you a lot of ease to utilize. On the other hand, but because it is agentless, it uses SSH or WinRM to run its configuration. And you can definitely run some security around this in order to open these ports during time intervals, or use vRealize Orchestrator to open these ports via tools. There's a lot of different flexibility within using vRealize automation with Ansible if you wanted to keep these ports closed, but yet still use Ansible. And then finally, a little bit more about that flexibility, right? When we talk about these components, these operating systems, I want to be very clear that, you were showing in this demo Linux and Windows, but that is kind of the tip of the iceberg. There's so many more other things that you can connect to in order to run this configuration against. And so it's extremely powerful. And all the different modules that it has for Ansible allows you to easily run specific modules against those operating systems for the necessary tasks that you're looking for. So that was a lot of slides. So let's hop into the demo here. And the first thing I'm going to do is reconnect to my VPN because it crashed in the middle of those slides. That definitely can happen. And once I've got that reconnected, then we can start going through here. I'm going to do a refresh, and it's going to probably ask me to log back in. Oh, fantastic. So let's load up our cloud assembly here. The first place I want to take you to is the infrastructure. This is where you create your Ansible integration. And we have one integration here for our Ansible open source. We can see we're connecting via an IP address. We also have an Ansible Tower integration here, just to show that these can be utilized both with vRealize automation, but we're focusing on open source today. So we have our inventory file path for our host file. And so that tells vRealize automation where this inventory is, because it's going to be modifying that file as it runs its necessary commands for it. And it just basically uses a username, asks if you need to use sudo for that user. Obviously, I've given my user ownership of the needed files, and so I don't need to check that box. And then you connect via a password or a private key. And in this particular case, I just used a password. So let's go back over to let's hop over to our deployments real quickly, just so we can see that this control box is actually here under management of vRealize automation. For those that have used Ansible open source, it's relatively easy to get running. And you can actually use vRealize automation to build that control box. You can actually use it so that it runs the necessary commandlets via Cloud Init, and then you basically just run the necessary files and updates to your playbooks and host files, etc., as necessary, as well as your Ansible config file. So we're going to hop in, and I'm going to start with our Linux deployment. I'm just going to go ahead and deploy these real quickly. And while they're deploying, I'll walk you through the blueprint and my super secret password. And let's kick that guy off. All right, let's go back over to the blueprint and take a look at this. So you can see here I have a network, I have a virtual machine, and then this new component here, which is Ansible. And so into the properties of our Ansible component, you can see that we're using here's the location of our host file, our username and private key file where we're specifying that information. And then here, we're specifying the necessary playbook that we want to run. Of course, you can specify these locations as you want. I've just followed kind of the default locations. The OS type is set to Linux. If you use Linux, it'll use SSH. If you use the Windows OS type, it'll default back to WinRM. And then here we have what groups in that host file we want to actually use. And then we can set a number of retries if we want to use multiples. And then what host we're going to run this up against, and then what account that we're going to use. And this account right here is actually the account for the integration. So this is the account name from there. In terms of what you're seeing on the screen, up here we have our Ansible box. Actually, both of these are our Ansible box. I'm hoping, there we go. The VPN didn't kick me off completely, or at least reconnected. So that's good. Down here is a tail of the log file. So hopefully if it's if it did reconnect as well as this box, we should start seeing some information fly past as the deployment's running. Let me bring that back up. And as that's going, let's go ahead and take a look at the Ansible box itself. And let's just take a look at a couple of the files that we're using. Excuse me. So basically, here's a number of files that we have on in our Ansible folder. So we have the configuration, we have our host file, playbooks, roles, specifically for multiple different modules that we want to run. We have a vault pass text for connections. We have additional variables that we can have for those playbooks as well. So let me hop into let me just cat our host real quickly. So you can see here that we're running our web server group as well as our Windows group. And you can see our web server group actually added this IP address, which was part of the design blueprint here. So it said to put this server into the web servers group. So we've added that. Now our deployment says that it finished, and I'm going to, whoops. I'm just going to type in that IP address and boom, fantastic. So this is just a basic Nginx deployment with some files and configurations so that we can see that Ansible has configured on this machine. And yeah, so we can see that this was done successfully. It looks like my tail is not working. So let's just close that out for now. And then let's go back and let's deploy our Windows box real quickly, just for the sake of time, because that does take a little bit of time. Windows normally takes a little bit longer. As you can see here, I'm connecting via just a username and password. I've changed my playbook to the Windows playbook and my group to Windows. So let's go ahead and deploy this guy. All right, so that kicked off. And let me try to bring our tail back just so that we can see. So let's go to our log location, and we're going to just do a tail follow on the Ansible log. And let me zoom in on that a little bit. There we go. Okay. So you'll notice a little bit something different about the Windows group. Windows has its own specific variables, and this is something to kind of separate between the two. I did want to point out a number of things that may look a little bit strange. With the updates that have been coming to Windows, OpenSSH is something that you can use with Ansible. And it actually can be a lot easier if you're not familiar with WinRM or setting up those WinRM connections. There are different scripts that you can run. There are different things that you can do in your environment to open those up. However, it may not be an OS configuration. You may have it blocked on your network firewall or all these other things. And there's a lot of different complexities that could happen when you're trying to use them. So if you're more familiar with SSH, that's actually a possibility. So you can see here, my Ansible connection is utilizing SSH. And if you state that you're going to use SSH, then you need to state a specific shell type. And my playbook that I'm running here for Windows actually is utilizing PowerShell. So I'm going to use the PowerShell shell type. And then, of course, my super secret username and password. And this is something that you can definitely utilize a SSH private key if you wanted to do that. If you wanted to take your password and store it in Vault, that's another way that you can integrate that with using Ansible to do that as well. And then, of course, I'm just using, I think this guy is a leftover, but it's if you're going to use your cert validation for WinRM, you can set that to ignore. But anyway, that kind of walks you through some of the ways to add variables to your specific groups. For instance, this is the Windows group. This is the variables for the Windows group. Let me hop into the playbook real quick. And let's take a quick look at our Windows playbook. Okay, cool. So if we look at our Windows playbook, we can see a number of different things. Like, for instance, we see the name, we see some facts, we see whether or not we're gathering our facts, which I'm not. And then we see this task here where we are connecting with a 30-second, 300-second wait. And so we're waiting for it, but we start checking every 60 seconds. So what we should see whenever the Ansible playbook actually starts kicking off, hopefully down here, we should see this task start running, in which it starts checking to see if that connection is connecting. And so basically it'll time out after 300 seconds and it'll delay for 60 seconds. So this goes to show a little bit on that human readable factor. Right. So in the task name, this is the actual task via the module. It just really is easy to kind of just say, okay, this is what it's actually doing. And then this commandlet that I'm running here is just a Windows shell that basically is going to run a number of PowerShell commands. The first one is going to be to install our web server, which is IIS, and it's going to include management tools. And then I'm going to change directory into the www root, remove its default IIS information, the default IIS file, and then create a new one that's blank. And then I'm going to add my own content to it, which is just basic HTML configuration for that content. I think my tail is having some issues on me. So let me just see here. I think well, that makes sense. Okay, so let me resize here. And so we can see here that first task to wait and then connect after 60 seconds is running. And then we had an okay response to that IP address. And we'll copy this guy. I was hoping to paste it before it finished. I didn't get there in time. Oh, well. So this is our IIS website that's up and running. And that came from that multi-line shell command that I ran where we were running. And you can see the response from that is that it did change. And then it runs a recap where it shows how much was okay, how much was changed. If there was anything unreachable, it'll show that. If it had to skip anything, it'll show it rescued or ignored. And so it gives you this information back and it's logging so that you can go back and find that information. And so this is very high level of just the different things that vRealize automation and Ansible can do. As you can see, these are very basic workflows that I've done. You can take this to a much different level. For instance, Ansible can be utilized for patch management. If you're using package management with Chocolatey, a lot of these modules is extremely easy in order to create that that state for how you want your machines to be built via Windows. And of course, you can use different package managers for your Linux distributions. And so that's really what I had for today. If there are any questions, I can take those now. And if not, thank you very much for joining.
Yep, Nathan, we have two questions here. The first is, should I use Python 2 or Python 3?
Oh, wow. Yeah. So that's a fun situation with Ansible because if you run your package manage installation, it'll probably install Python 2 and it'll give you some deprecation warnings, much like the deprecation warnings that showed up in the log file for those eagle-eyed people that saw them. And so, you can use both depending on what you want. If you are going to go the WinRM route, I would very strongly suggest sticking with Python 3, as that allows you a little bit more versatility with PyWinRM. But that's just specific to what you're planning on doing. Python 3 is a different installation than Python 2, but all of that is very well documented on Ansible's sites. So you can feel free to take a look there.
Great. And the last question is, what is a great way to start with Ansible?
Okay, so wow. So that one, there's so many different ways to do it. If you're familiar with a lot of people don't have a home lab where they can spin up an Ubuntu or a Linux box and just package manage in Ansible's installation. If you do have that, that's probably the easiest way to do it. If you can run Ansible on so many different things. If you have a machine locally, you can just use VirtualBox to build an Ubuntu box and run Ansible. Or if you want to use like a Raspberry Pi and connect it with Ansible, you can learn those types of solutions. And you can take all of those things and really utilize them with vRealize automation when you can, obviously connect vRealize automation with this integration is really powerful. But there's a whole other world in vRealize Orchestrator where you can connect to Ansible and use it as, just like a playbook deployment without the infrastructure, right? So this integration comes with a little bit of infrastructure as a service, right? So you can kind of decouple that in vRealize Orchestrator and just run specific Ansible commands for configuration management instead of doing cron jobs or things like that. So there's a whole new versatility that's brought into this whole solution when you start talking about anything as a service through vRealize Orchestrator and other solutions with vRealize automation. But that in itself is, kind of a good place to start, using VirtualBox, using Raspberry Pi, or, if you've got the ability to spin up a VM, in a development environment, definitely that's a good way of doing it too.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Nathan. If that's all the questions we have for today. If anybody thinks of another question that pops up later today or later this week, please feel free to reach out to any of these email aliases up on the screen. We're happy to help you answer your questions, get you more information, or set up a separate one-on-one demo. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks all.